you enforce the lie that men can be women, and so you prime people for the lie, and then you confuse the most vulnerable people and tilt them into like an irrecoverable pathology. And then it got even worse, because I didn't think at that time that we would have an epidemic of like mutilating and sterilizing surgery. Like, I have an imagination for evil, but I got to say it didn't extend that far.
Because it seems absurd.
Well, it is. It is. It's the ultimate in evil clown.
Yep.
Like, it's the worst thing that you can imagine. It's got this horrible element of satirical the blackest of satirical comedy, and you can see that in the transgender movement on the political side, in all sorts of other ways, because the drag phenomena is satire of femininity. And so it's got that dark edge to it. And, when that was a fringe thing for theaters, well, it wasn't disrupting all of the world. But when it moves to the center, whenever the fringe moves to the center, all hell breaks loose. Because the fringe is multiplicity, and the center can't be multiplicity, obviously. It's not a center then. It's chaos. So, okay, war on children, investigation into the transgender phenomenon. Now you start taking on the corporations, and you start with Tractor Supply. So walk us through that story, if you would, and then let's walk through the corporations one by one. And if you would, detail out how your strategy developed and your influence grew.
Yeah, so with Tractor Supply, essentially the way we approached it is, number one, we had to make sure we didn't play into the PR strategy of this will blow over. So what we did is we said, okay, the first video is going to be like a knockout where it's got to be really strong, but we can't put everything, because we need to be able to have pieces of information every day just dripping out that you include many of the pieces that are still very impactful. So we hold back some of the stuff that we would consider the best stuff, as long as we can make sure we have a decent portion of sort of explaining the problem in that first video. Our first video on a company tends to be somewhere between 7 and 10 minutes. Any longer than that, people, I think if you're talking about the attention span of millions of people who are swiping on social media, you start to lose people, So we stick to that time span, and then each day we sort of drip out different pieces of what we've found through our investigations. And our investigations are a combination of what the whistleblowers bring forward to us, and then secondary, we do really great open source investigations on the companies. You'd be shocked, Jordan. Actually, I don't think you would be, because of your background in psychology. I think a lot of people would be shocked by the types of interviews that executives at major companies grant, where there's like 5 views ever all time on the interview, but they do it because of their own narcissism, so, and they're filled with mistakes. And so nobody's ever really gone through all these, logged them, cut them, labeled them, and saved them for the future. We've been doing that now for a couple of months on a lot of companies, okay? Companies that we've never said a word about. We've already got every crazy interview their executives have ever given, and we've got them cut, labeled, and ready to go when we move on to them. The other part of this is we recognize going one by one is important, because just like, any sort of hunt, when you've got animals all together as a herd, they're much stronger. So if you try to take on corporate America by going and attacking a group of them who are all together as 100 corporations, you're going to get nowhere. But if you focus in on one and make them the target of the ire of customers that they need in their stores, that's a totally different prospect. Because at the end of the day, these are public companies by and large that we do this with. Because private companies are a little bit different in terms of their ability to kind of wiggle and skate out of a lot of this. But with public companies, the board has a fiduciary duty to shareholders. So if the board is aware that conservative consumers make up a cross-section of their customer base that is anything beyond 20%, it's malpractice for them to allow a story like this to go and grow legs for over a month and reach hundreds of millions of people, because each company we focus on has generated hundreds of millions of impressions. So that's better than a lot of national ad campaigns can do. And and that's not counting, by the way, the mainstream media coverage of what we've done. I don't even know what those numbers would be. I mean, I'm less and less impressed by the stuff that they're able to pull in, because it seems like people like yourself or me.
They're dying.
They really are. They're dying breed. But in general, for these companies,
no, they're a suicidal breed. There are
That
suicide
too,
bombers.
that too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
in general, we're crossing into this new paradigm of how information works, right? And so I think this is one of those early stories where corporations are having to learn some very hard lessons. But I will say a lot of them are learning quickly, because if you look at sort of what we did in the timeline, we went from Tractor Supply, took about 3 weeks to get a statement from them where they changed all their policies. I mean, they dropped every woke thing that we had put out there. Then after that, we focused on John Deere. For those who are unfamiliar with John Deere, big tractor company. I mean, we're talking again about a company that depends on probably 90% conservative consumers, right? And for them, it took about 3 weeks as well to get them to flip. Then we got to Harley. Harley was one that I think was psychologically very important to what we have done
I
going
would say
forward.
so.
But you know what's interesting, Jordan, is that they're one of the smallest companies that we have flipped.
It's pretty ironic when you think about it. Millions of military members have fought for our freedom, yet we're losing more privacy every day. Our phones are listening, tech companies are tracking everything we do online, and it's all completely legal. Fighting for freedom isn't just the military's job anymore. We need to do our part too. That's why I use ExpressVPN. It's basically like a shield for your internet activity. Everything gets sent through encrypted servers so nobody can see what you're doing online. Not your internet provider, not data brokers, not government agencies. Here's what really impressed me. Last year, ExpressVPN got over 400,000 requests for customer data for tech companies and government agencies. You know how many times they actually handed over data? 0. They literally can't share what they don't have in their zero log policy. The best part? It's stupidly easy to use. Just one click and you're protected. It works on everything too: phones, computers, tablets, even your smart TV. You can protect up to 8 devices at once, so your whole family gets that privacy back. ExpressVPN is so good, it even blocked me from wirelessly accessing the Daily Wire server for work. If you want to fight for your freedom from home, ExpressVPN is one of the best tools you can have. Find out how you can get 4 months free by scanning the QR code on screen, clicking the link in the description box below, or by going to expressvpn.com/JordanYT.
But I would say psychologically maybe the most important one, because their CEO was not a typical CEO. Like many of the CEOs of these companies that we have flipped, they're kind of agnostic about the whole thing, if not opponents of the wokeness, but they didn't know what the heck was going on at their own companies. And there's this like pervasive ignorance about how bad it's gotten. And then they're like, oh gosh, we didn't know that. Yeah, let's fix it. But in the case of Harley, this CEO is a true believer. This is a guy who founded the B Team with Richard Branson. The B Team's explicit purpose is to force wokeness through corporate America by bringing in new leaders who believe in the woke ideology in general. So they want to do this on a global scale. And they've been quite successful at a number of companies forcing these new leaders in and bringing their ideologies with them. And so that was one where I said, you know what? They may dig in their heels, but we need to do this right to where if they do dig in their heels, they're not going to recover from it, because we have to make this just absolutely clear to the consumer how far gone they are from the values of their consumer base. And I think we did a good job of that. Again, we started with the long video explaining the problem, but we had such a large amount of material. Like one of the videos we held back initially was the interview of their CEO describing himself as the Taliban of sustainability. And so for people, I thought it was very important we break that video down. Taliban of sustainability, what does that actually mean? To me, what it means, if you describe yourself that way, the Taliban of anything, it means you are willing to do anything for what you believe in. There is no red line you won't cross. You are a terrorist for that cause. That's what it means to me. And sustainability is just a buzzword to describe wokeness in total, right? So when I hear Taliban of sustainability, I am a terrorist for this left-wing ideology. I will do anything to make sure that it comes to fruition. And if you look at sort of the policies they had adopted, well, it's very clear that seems like that was the direction they were going. And he even had an explicit desire to reshape capitalism, is the way they say it. Marxists love to do that. Reshape capitalism. You can eliminate cronyism from capitalism, but that's not what they were describing. They weren't describing removing cronyism. They were describing a system where essentially, businesses operate as a social benefit to society. That's not what capitalism was ever meant to be. That's not capitalism. And the way they describe it is just a pathway to pure Marxism. And it's something actually I think is a very important, interesting point that I think you will find interesting and maybe have some things to say on. I think coming from a family who had communism steal everything, I think it's very important people understand the modern left. They are a new age version of the Communist Party. And when I say that, there's some fundamentally important differences, but I think once people hear them, if they scoffed at the beginning at me using the term communist to describe what they're doing, I think they won't after they hear this. The fundamental difference here is that they no longer believe in the need to seize the means of production because they realize something incredibly important. The power structure on the left realized that optically, it's going to be really hard to sell the idea of communism to a populace who understands that communism killed so many people in such a brutal way, right? Like, that's not going to be a popular sell to come out and say, hey, we want to be communists. We want to take over industry. We want to control your life. That's not something people generally are going to be really amenable to, right? Not if you say it openly. What they realized was you don't need to go seize the means of production. You just need to control the minds of the people in charge of production. And if people doubt that that's the path we're on, look no further than big tech. Look at Google. Look at Facebook. Every one of these companies acts as an arm of the state's ruling party. That's not capitalism. That's not, business just doing its thing, answering to the free market. We fundamentally shifted from a system where customer is king to one where the needs and desires of the Democratic Party are king, and secondary to that are the needs and desires of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Now, we're fundamentally shifting the reality back with what we're doing to say, no, actually, customer's king. Because you know what? If you own John Deere, you own Tractor Supply, you own Harley Davidson, guess who's not walking in your door to buy your products? BlackRock's not, Vanguard's not, State Street's not, the Democratic Party is not. My people are. And so fundamentally shifting that reality, I think psychologically, a lot of important things happened from forcing Harley to change. One of those things was that people felt like, okay, one, maybe a fluke. Two, possibly just extremely lucky. 3 companies in a row, it was like, oh, this is actually working. This is a trend. This is something that can be replicated and continue. And we are a force in the market where we're shifting. In the case of Tractor Supply, it was an almost $3 billion loss in market cap during our campaign. With John Deere, almost $10 billion loss in market cap during our campaign, $10 billion. And as you look at sort of what's happening in the market, one of the fears that a lot of people tried to sell about, you can't leave wokeness, it's going to lose you money, right? Every company that has come out and rejected these policies as a product of our campaigns has seen their stock go up the day that they announced that they were dropping these policies. Every single one had their stock go up the day they announced. That's not an accident. The market's not going to punish you because retail's more involved than ever in the market. And these bigger players like Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock, they actually, I think, don't know what to do with us. They don't know what to do now that there's an activated consumer base on the right who is willing to use their wallet as a weapon, because they fundamentally understand that I'm right in terms of the thesis that at the end of the day, you need us to walk in the doors. If we don't walk in the doors at these places, you're toast. You can go and have institutional investors try to prop you up till the next quarter. But when you have to report earnings and people see that you had a really sizable loss in one strategic area of your business, or maybe the business in total, you're going to have big problems. You're not going to get your bonus. There's financial consequences for the decisions you've been making. And so that's what we're trying to make abundantly clear. So as a byproduct of that, one of these other positive things is psychologically in the minds of executives, okay, things had changed. Now these people are somebody you need to be afraid of. If they come to your door, they mean business. They have the ability to reach hundreds of millions of eyeballs, and you don't want that. You don't want to be the story anymore. So we fundamentally altered our approach a little bit. Now, instead of just going straight with the story, we started to reach out ahead of time and say, hey, we've been investigating. Here's what we found. We're planning a story. And essentially, we want to make sure our story is right. If you have any corrections or you want to let us know about any changes you're considering as a byproduct of reading our reporting, let us know. You have until this date to give us a comment, correction, or feedback as far as changes go. And we offer off-the-record conversation between Robbie and your executive. If they want to talk through this issue at all, we're happy to do so. And I've had those off-the-record talks with a lot of these companies and their executives, and they've frankly been very productive talks. I'm very pragmatic. I mean, to them, I'm sure they would love if I was like, kind of an idiot and I was like trying to strong arm them into this, but I'm not. The truth is, for us, it's fundamentally simple. We're going to report one way or the other. It's just either going to be about your past failures or you changing things. That's up to the companies, though. We're not like these shakedown artists on the left. We're not asking for money. We don't want money, which a lot of them I think find quite surprising. Like, I'm willing to fund whatever we need to myself. And then we've got great subscribers on X who help fund our research team growing, because I'd say the hardest part of what we do right now is we've got over 5,000 whistleblowers. So it's important that people continue doing that.
5,000.
Yes, 5,000. And we don't want to discourage people from doing it, because we're scaling up our team to be able to meet the needs of the number of whistleblowers we're getting. And they're fantastic. People are sending us evidence probably right now as you and I
How many
speak.
How many corporations are implicated in that network of 5,000?
We don't have a solid number on that because there is crossover between the 5,000. So, maybe 10 of them are at the same company type thing. I don't think we've broken that down to see what that actually looks like. But I mean, we're talking, well into the hundreds and hundreds, if not over.
Okay. So that's the order of magnitude anyways.
Yeah. And so then we have metrics for, how do we do this to make sure we choose the right companies to be able to move us in the direction we want to go, to sort of change the norm, because I'm a big believer, everything I do in life, I always teach my kids this: any big decision you're going to make or change you're trying to make, always try to go outside of yourself. Go into an eagle eye view. You're just kind of looking at things from overhead in as unbiased of a way as you possibly can. And when I look at sort of the lay of the land here, as if this is a battlefield, I see very clearly you have to make the right decisions or you're going to get, cut off at the knees very easily. And so for us, it's pick the right companies. And those metrics are fairly simple right now. It's like we look at who the customer base is. We look at the regions that they do well in. We look at, what do they sell? Who are they selling to in general? Because there's different subgroups within the demographics of who their customers are. And then secondary to that, this is a big one, and I think this is more of a feel than a science. We do look very deeply at the board and at the executives and the psychology of who they are as people. So we look at the psychology of these board members because I think that gives us a really strong window into, sort of how we fix things, right? Because each one of them is different. Some of them are true believers, some of them are not. And they're just simply there at that moment in time because after George Floyd, they gave license to these crazed lunatics in the HR and PR departments to go and apply all these policies that would mean that executive was not a racist, because that's really what they were concerned about. They didn't want to be pitted as a racist because at the time they felt like that would have been fatal. And now we're in a fundamentally different time because 4 years-ish later, the whole company's had to experience what this looks like, right? And so what was sold to them is, this unifying, diverse, inclusive thing is anything but. Everybody's experienced it. They'd rather, have their eyeballs poked out than do another DEI training because frankly, we all know that it's mind-numbingly stupid. And it's beyond farce because it's simply propaganda at this point. I've done over 100 of these trainings, these big DEI trainings that the major companies use. They are some of the most ludicrous trash I've ever read in my life. And every single one of them has one thing that I found in common. They pretty much all have resources, okay? At the end of the training, they've got this resources section. I have yet to find one resource that is even center lane politically. Every single resource that is recommended is extremely far left. And the number one most recommended resource in these DEI trainings will always be kind of darkly funny to me. It's Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Right. Which I find really ironic since these are major corporations telling their employees, you should read this book as part of your DEI training. And the book says to be an anti-racist, you must be an anti-capitalist. That is the thesis, the core thesis of the book. And you've got the largest companies in the Fortune 100 telling their employees, yeah, go read this guy's book. It's signing your own death warrant ideologically, which is the most bizarre part of the whole thing. But the executives at the top are largely ignorant to it. You've got a couple of true believers, but most of them tell me in truth, and I actually believe them, that they had no idea. When I show them these trainings, they're like in shock and they go, oh no, we've got to get rid of this. This is crazy. And they always go, we didn't know we had activists in the company. Yes, every single one of these companies has activists across the board in these different areas. And what people don't realize at these executive positions, because they've largely worked to get there over the course of some odd like 20, 30 years, right? They don't realize the kids coming out of college today are fundamentally different from the kids you went to college with. You went to college in a time where people went to college to become a professional at something. Kids today, the profession, the major, it's all a veneer in large part for many of the kids, not all of them, but for many of them. In truth, what they're meant to become as a byproduct of going to college is a trained activist. So they go into whatever job they've been given a diploma to fit into with the intent purpose of spreading the poison is this ideology. They're spreading the poison. It's become a cancer throughout these companies, but that is their purpose. They believe the same way that somebody who is religious believes that they need to evangelize. These people are religiously captured by this ideology. It is their God. And so the way that you are willing, if you're a religious person, to do anything for God, these people are willing to do the same for their ideology. And the sooner we understand that, the sooner we're going to understand why it requires us to speak up. Because I will say this, and this may be the most important thing I say throughout this whole thing. The biggest mistake conservatives and normal people have made over the last 30 years is not only celebrating, but promoting the idea we should be a silent majority. Silent majorities get people killed. Silent majorities destroy countries. They are the most poisonous thing you can possibly be because it allows a very loud, deranged minority to take over the entirety of your country, every major institution, and they guide the path of the future that your children are going to have to live in. It is shameful to be a silent majority. There has never been a time where it was more important for people to understand that fundamental fact. It is time for people to take personal responsibility. Stop waiting for a politician to save you. Step up, do the work yourself to make a difference where you live. Because the truth is, if we all did that and we all took personal responsibility and you took that eagle eye view we talked about earlier, you would see very clearly that each one of these pockets of our country was protected as a byproduct of each individual community taking control and saying, we're not going to allow this crazy here. If that was happening, instead of people waiting for a politician to save them, we'd be in a much better place.